Thank you for your kind words of introduction, Erica. Good evening, t.Lab students, parents, supporters, and friends. It is my honor to share some words at this t.Lab's 7th annual Black Tie Ball. This is one of my favorite events. Seeing all the young children outfitted in their finest attire and families coming together to celebrate achievement warms my heart, even if we're doing it virtually this year. And by the way, everyone looks great on the Zoom call. I cannot wait until we are all back together in person to support t.Lab. This year's Black Tie Ball theme is Driving Excellence while raising our community, country, and the world. Erica spoke a little about the various professional titles and roles I've had over the years. But one of the roles I'm really proud of is t.Lab parent, because t.Lab is all about excellence. To be recognized as a top 1% academic performer, to achieve a perfect ACT score, to develop excellent oratorical skills, to achieve a high level of proficiency in technology with multiple certifications in computer applications, to excel in summer enrichment programs with top schools like Brown and Kettering universities. In 2020, it's difficult to accomplish these kinds of educational objectives, but we must persevere. We must position our children for success, despite the challenges with all that's hitting us right now. The COVID-19 pandemic, a tough economy, unemployment, political unrest, and law enforcement and police organizations that do not always recognize that Black lives matter. But ladies and gentlemen, we must admit, as challenging as things are now, they are nowhere near as difficult as the conditions of the past. We don't have to work 2 full-time jobs to go to school. And we don't have to walk hundreds or thousands of miles to go to school. And parents, it is no longer against the law for us to help our kids with their reading and writing. I'm reminded of 5 strong African Americans and their struggle to obtain an education. I'm going to share their stories with you this evening. The first one is Booker T. Washington. He was born in a one-room shack on a slave plantation. Throughout slavery, there was very little that parents could do to guide, help, and steer their children, let alone educate them. It was actually illegal for slaves to be educated before the Civil War. Not surprisingly, as a slave, young Booker T. Washington was illiterate. But when he saw white children sitting in school, he wanted to learn just like those children. His mother noticed how much he wanted to learn. And when the Civil War was over, for the first time, she could do something about it. She somehow got him a book which explained how to read and write in very basic terms. He taught himself to read and then was able to go to school. Let me tell you what a commitment it took for him to get that schooling. As a child, he worked 2 grueling full-time jobs, starting at 4 o'clock each morning. Yet, somehow, when he got off work, he found the strength to study. Can you imagine trying to get an education under those circumstances? One day, while at his coal mining job, he heard about a place called Hampton Institute, which educated Negroes beyond high school. Washington was enthralled. He saved his money and then made his way east to Hampton Institute. How did he get there? There was no family car, no buses, and no planes. Trains existed, but he couldn't afford the fare, and it was 500 miles away. Booker T. Washington had to walk every one of those 500 miles. That's the kind of determination our ancestors had. That's how much they valued education. Booker T. Washington's education allowed him to become a great leader in his time. He founded Tuskegee Institute and touched millions of lives. That's Booker T. Washington's story. But I'll tell you, some of our people walked even more than 500 miles to get an education. For example, there was James L. Farmer Sr. He walked more than 1,100 miles to go to college. That's all the way from the state of Georgia to the city of Boston, Massachusetts. Farmer's parents were slaves, and as a lad, he received limited schooling. But the great Mary McLeod Bethune arranged for him to go to high school. This young man was smart and earned straight A's, and upon graduation, he was admitted to Boston University and awarded a tuition scholarship. It was the year 1909, and there were more modes of transportation available than there had been for poor Booker T. Washington in the 19th century. But you know what? Farmer had no money for travel and expenses. If he was going to school in Boston, he would have to walk there. And ladies and gentlemen, that's just what he did. James Farmer walked over 1,100 miles in pursuit of his dream for an education. Farmer was on a mission. Once he got to Boston, he took 2 full-time jobs to cover his expenses. He earned multiple degrees, including a PhD. Farmer went on to have an important career in ministry and academia. But you know what? He is best known for raising his son, James L. Farmer Jr. If you saw the movie, The Great Debaters, which starred Denzel Washington a few years ago, you saw young Farmer Jr. depicted. A brilliant student, he became one of our great civil rights leaders, organizing the Freedom Rides in the 1960s. As we know, the Freedom Rides were the structured program of civil disobedience that helped kill Jim Crow. 1,100 miles. Farmer had no MapQuest, no Uber, no Airbnb. How many of us have that kind of commitment? A few minutes ago, I mentioned Mary McLeod Bethune. She played a key role in the James Farmer story. But who was she? This woman founded 2 educational institutions and was one of the most important leaders of her generation. But I bring her up today to share the story of how she obtained her education. Mary McLeod Bethune's parents and her 16 brothers and sisters were all born into slavery. She was the only one young enough to receive schooling after the Civil War ended. Each day, young Mary walked 5 miles to a one-room school. And then when school was over, she walked home, sat down, and taught her family what she learned that day. Now that's hard. Some say Miss Bethune's determination was triggered by an old memory. A young white boy once insulted her when she had the temerity to put her hands on a book and pick it up. He yelled at her, "What are you doing with that? You can't read." History doesn't record whether the boy used the N-word, but it's clear from how Mary McLeod Bethune responded that he may as well have. That boy's insult, however, fueled Mary McLeod Bethune's determination to get an education and then educate her family and rise to the heights her career took her. That young man changed history and did us all a favor. My 4th story tonight is about a Detroiter. It is 1949. Damon J. Keith is a law school graduate, but he is also a janitor, working at the Detroit News Building downtown. He hates the job. He hates the sound of flushing toilets. He hates the fetid smell. On this particular day, he took his lunch in a quiet hallway, hoping to sneak in a few minutes of study. Leaning against a wall, he nibbled on a sandwich while propping up a law book in his arms. He softly recited the legal terms to himself. "What are you reading?" Damon snapped to attention and almost dropped his sandwich. An older white man, who was a Detroit news reporter, stared at him long and hard, as if he were watching a zoo animal do some sort of trick. "I'm just reading a law book, sir," Damon said. The reporter continued to stare. "Law book?" "Yes, I'm studying for the bar exam." "What for?" "I'm going to be a lawyer." The reporter paused, looked Damon up and down, and then laughed so hard he almost fell down. "You're kidding," he exclaimed. "A black lawyer?" He laughed some more and said, "I think you better keep mopping, boy," and walked away. Damon closed his eyes. He knew he was better educated and more talented than many white men working in that building. He also knew no white lawyer in Detroit with the same credentials would ever have to start off where he was, a janitor, cleaning toilets and mopping floors. The sound of that man's derisive laughter would remain with Damon J. Keith for the rest of his life. I'll tell you what, that reporter had no idea that the education Damon possessed would power him to incredible heights far beyond what anyone in the Detroit news building ever achieved. He would become one of Detroit's top lawyers and then serve for more than 50 years on the country's second highest court, writing some of the most important decisions in civil rights and civil liberties jurisprudence. Think of the stories we've shared so far tonight. Booker T. Washington, James Farmer, Mary McLeod Bethune, Judge Damon Keith. And there are scores of strong men and women just like them. I'm talking about our ancestors. We owe it to them to make the most of the opportunities we have today. Jay-Z put it this way.
The president is black, but his house is all white.
Rosa Parks sat so Martin Luther King could walk. Martin Luther King walked so Obama could run. Obama ran so we can fly. t.Lab students, your opportunity is now. You are poised to fly. As parents, our responsibility is to be a bridge from the rich legacy of our ancestors to the journey we hope and dream for our children. When our children are young, they cannot be expected to have the necessary perspective and vision. That is our job as parents. And it's been my experience that that window of opportunity to make a difference in our children's lives goes by so fast. In a flash, the elementary, middle school, and high school years are over. And I'm going to say two things now that are perhaps contradictory. Number one, it's never too late for us to guide our kids. But number two, it's better to start as early as you can. Now let's get specific. What do we as parents need to do to help our kids fly? First of all, we need to set an example. Children learn and emulate what they see. So, do you want our children to read? Of course we do. If that's the case, we should start by making sure our children see us read. And wouldn't it be a good idea if each year we read a few books together with our kids? Now, I know it's a bit more difficult to do these days with all the digital and other distractions, but if you can engender a love of reading and a facility for language in your kids, you will have given them a priceless gift. And most of us believe it would be great if our children spoke a foreign language. How do we make that happen? I tell you what, it doesn't matter whether we parents are fluent in a second language. or whether we are able to travel with our kids. We have the internet, and there are public and school libraries. And also, there is the great multicultural character of our Detroit metropolitan area. We can all find a way for our kids to become bilingual and citizens of the world. And of course, t.Lab has great resources in the foreign language arts. t.Lab also does a great job developing math and coding skills, thanks to Dr. Neha and Dr. Nixon. Let me also say that one of the most important things we parents need to do is be knowledgeable and aware of the college options available to our children. Sure, everyone in our state knows about the University of Michigan and Michigan State. But are you familiar with the Honors College at Michigan State? Do you know the financial options available at Wayne State? How about Kettering, Kalamazoo, and Albion? That they are three of the best institutions of higher learning in America. And that's just the state of Michigan. And let me ask you this, how much would it change your child's life if he or she went to an Ivy League college? Every year, there are children from the city of Detroit who attend Harvard, Yale, Brown, or other Ivy League schools. Why not yours or mine? And how familiar are you with HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities? There are more than 100 of them, some with a rich history spanning over 150 years. It's amazing that 70% of black doctors, 50% of black engineers, and 35% of black lawyers and teachers are graduates of HBCUs. And each year, kids from Detroit find their way to Howard, Morehouse, Spelman, Hampton, and other historically black colleges. Why not yours or mine? Of course, not every student should go to an HBCU. But let's get this straight. Don't be like the parents whose kids don't go because the parents just don't know. HBCUs can be more nurturing than other schools. They have a knack for helping our children achieve greatness. They often do an outstanding job of developing our children into great men and women as leaders and as politically evolved citizens. And at the end of the day, the statistics speak for themselves. HBCUs overproduce excellence in our children. Having said that, your child may have other options that make more sense for him or her than attending an HBCU. But if I had a girl, I would do what Michelle Obama did. I would have her apply to Spelman, even if she ends up at the University of Michigan. I'm going to close with my fifth and last story. It's about a man who was the keynote speaker at this event 2 years ago. He was born and raised in LaGrange, Georgia. His family moved north when he was entering high school. Let's just say the transition to Flint, Michigan's public schools was not seamless. And this young man found that he was not prepared. Hard as he tried, his grades left much to be desired, and he was soon trapped into a non-academic program with courses like basic English, metal shop, and personal math. You know, learning how to balance your checkbook. So when it came time for college, this young man's options, as you can imagine, were quite limited. Nevertheless, he wanted to go to college, and his parents wanted that for him too. So one day, his mother took him to see the guidance counselor. It was a tough meeting. The mother sat with her son while the counselor reviewed her son's record. She watched the counselor sigh and frown and shift uncomfortably in his seat. After a long time, the counselor told the mother, "I'm sorry, but this is not very promising. Your son's grades and test scores are bad." The young man dropped his shoulders. His mother looked at her deflated son and then turned to the counselor with water in her eyes and said, "Couldn't we at least start Willie in community college?" The counselor said, "No, I'm sorry. I wouldn't recommend it. Your son is just not college material. But I'll be more than happy to write a letter of recommendation for him to get an hourly job at the factory just down the road. It was the early 1960s, and plant jobs were plentiful in Flint, Michigan. But this mother wasn't having it. She looked that guidance counselor in the eye and simply would not let go of his gaze. Speaking in a firm, determined voice, the way you speak when your child's life and future is literally at stake, she pleaded, "Just give my son a chance. Please, just give Willie a chance." The counselor rolled his eyes and then he sighed. He didn't really want to, but he could tell this mother was not going to let it go. So he said, "All right, it's against my better judgment, but we're going to let him in. But I'm warning you, it's only for one semester and he will be watched closely." Thanks to Mother Picard doing what we parents sometimes have to do, this young man was accepted at my community college. He made it through that probationary first semester to the surprise of that guidance counselor. Bill Picard graduated and got his associate's degree. And he went on to attend Western Michigan University, the University of Michigan, and the Ohio State University, where he earned bachelor's, master's, and PhD degrees. Dr. William F. Picard, as he is known today, is a highly successful businessman, a critically acclaimed author, and holds major interests in entertainment, manufacturing, news media, and retail. He also leads the 13th largest African American owned company in the United States. Fact is, all this started and was made possible by a parent who stepped up and did what she had to do. That's a lesson for all of us. Don't get me wrong, our kids have to do their part, but we parents must lay the foundation. And with each of our kids, there is often a moment of truth where we must step up, like Mother Picard. Help them pick the right school. Stay on them about reading, learning a language, or doing their math. Sometimes we may even have to look someone in the eye and demand that they give our son or daughter a chance. Just one chance. As I said, we're no longer in slavery. Jim Crow is over. No one has to walk hundreds, let alone thousands of miles to go to school. We and our kids have no excuses. Let's make our ancestors proud. Let's seize the moment.